Welcome to the Plane Guys. I'm Jeffrey Thomas and I'm joined by my co-host from Germany, Richard Godfrey. Good morning, Richard.
Good afternoon, Jeffrey.
And today we're going to look at the tragic China Eastern Airlines flight MU 5735, for which there still is no report, although it happened, I think, almost 3 years ago now. So
Yep.
Richard's going to look at this, done a lot of research on it. And so, Richard, first of all, can you give us an overview of what happened?
Yeah. China Eastern Airlines flight MU 5735 crashed on the 21st of March 2022. It was on a domestic flight from Kunming to Guangzhou in China. There were 132 passengers and nine crew, and unfortunately, they were all killed. China Eastern Airlines is the third largest airline in China, based in Shanghai, and is state owned. There are 66 airlines in China, and out of those 66, 39 are state owned, and they carry 620 million passengers per year, which is quite a size. The aircraft was a Boeing 737-800 series, a Dash 89P, and was only 6 years old. Boeing have delivered a total of 4,989 aircraft in the 737-800 series since 1989, and only 11 have ever been involved in a fatal accident over the last 27 years. So they have a very good safety record.
Yeah. And one thing I should add there is that people don't realize that 737s and A320s, these are the short haul champions of the world, they do four and five sectors a day, whereas a 777 or a 747 will do probably one flight a day. So there's a enormous number of them flying many thousands of sectors every day. So, Richard, describe the sequence of events that led up to the crash.
Sure. The CAAC in China has not published a flight plan for this flight and has only given very few details of the crash. The preliminary report published on the 20th of April was only one page long, which is, very small.
Mm,
Um, there is no official ADSB data, but fortunately, Flight Radar 24 and Flight Aware have published ADSB data. I downloaded the Flight Radar 24 data, the 397 data points, but it is still only a partial coverage of the flight route. We're showing a screenshot of the ADSB data marked in black, which follows the flight route A599 marked in red. The crash location was in a remote wooded area, and it was difficult for rescue workers to reach the site. The remaining fuel, which I estimated around 2,500 kilos, caused a fire on impact, which created a forest fire in the area. That had to be extinguished first before rescuers could reach the scene. And the impact left a crater 141 meters long and 2.7 meters deep, which then it started to rain and it filled with water during the wreckage recovery. And so pumps had to be brought in to pump out the water. It was quite a difficult crash site.
yes. So, what were the results of the initial investigation? Um,
Yeah, very few. They note there was no Mayday call. They note the weather was good. They note there were no dangerous goods carried in the cargo bay. And the departure from cruising altitude created an alarm in the air traffic control center in Guangzhou. Um, and they noted on radar then that the aircraft just suddenly started a sharp descent for apparently no reason. The aircraft was at the top of the descent into Guangzhou, uh, but the sharp descent was much faster than the descent typically when you're coming into to land. And this descent was caught on a security camera uh, in CCTV from a nearby mining company, and it was in an almost vertical dive at the end of the descent into the wooded area. Um, in fact, the aircraft descended so fast that the structure experienced flutter, and a part of the wingtip, 4 feet long, from the winglet area at the end of the wing, separated and was found 12 kilometers away from the main crash site.
Was there any technical issue with the aircraft or the equipment? What did investigators say?
Um, there was no technical issue reported with the aircraft. They went through all the maintenance records and they were thoroughly checked and found to be okay. Boeing and NTSB sent investigators to China and they were granted visas. It was during the COVID time, so they had to work in isolation. But they arrived on the 2nd of April, 2022, and they found the CVR, cockpit voice recorder, on the 23rd of March and the flight data recorder on the 27th of March. The CVR was first shipped to Beijing for analysis, but then the FDR was shipped directly to the NTSB in Washington, D.C., and that was followed by the CVR following the Beijing analysis. So we got damaged FDR and damaged CVR, but fortunately it was possible to recover the data from both. The investigators from Boeing and NTSB verified there was no structural sort of coming apart of the aircraft, a so-called in-flight breakup, and the integrity of the structure was intact and until the crash. So all seemed good from the aircraft systems point of view. The ADS-B data made it clear that the final sequence of events was adjacent to waypoint ATLAT, 5 nautical miles laterally offset south of the flight path at the top of the descent into Guangzhou. The throttle was switched to idle, the autopilot disengaged, and 4 minutes later there was a maximum nose down attitude, which caused the alarm in the air traffic control center. And at just 5 minutes later, or 118 seconds into the dive from 29,100 feet, the plane crashed.
Yeah. Was there any problem with the flight crew? This has been a very heavily debated subject.
Yeah, there were 3 flight crew and 1 in-flight security guard and 5 flight attendants. The captain, Yang Hongda, was 32 years old and quite experienced. He had 6,709 flying hours, all on the Boeing 737 aircraft type. And the first officer, Zhang Zhengping, was 59 years old, and he was one of the most experienced pilots in the airline, with 31,769 flying hours. The third pilot, Ni Gongzhao, was in training, and he was just an observer on this flight. Now, the first officer had a 42-year career in flying with several generations of aircraft. He started learning to fly gliders while he was still at school, and he was then selected for the military style Civil Aviation Academy in 1980. And he was then flying the Russian Anatov AN-24, which is called a Yun 5 in China, for the People Liberation Army. And then he trained on the Boeing 737-300. Then he trained on the Boeing 767. And then he went back to the Boeing 737-700 and finally the 737-800. And he joined an airline called Yunnan Airlines back in 1992, which is based in Kunming, where he lived. And that was taken over by China Eastern in 2002. And he had flown from the old Kunming airport up until 2012. And then he flew from the new international airport in Kunming. And this guy has won many awards as a meritorious pilot, a check airman, a training captain, a five-star captain, a squadron leader, and he even got a Labor Day medal from the Yunnan province. So he won just about every prize there is in the book. And he had trained over 100 pilots in China Eastern Airlines, and he was known in the airline as Instructor Zhang. The first officer, Zhang, was demoted from being a five-star captain to first officer, and the reasons for that are not clear. He actually trained the captain on this flight, who was 27 years his junior. And he was about to retire at the age of 60 at the end of 2022. The demotion halved his salary, and he lost his life savings in a Evergrande real estate scandal in China. So he was not a happy individual.
Sounds very troubled indeed. Yeah. So, which investigators were involved in this tragedy, Richard?
Yeah, the formal investigation is in the hands of the CAAC, the Chinese Aviation Authority. NTSB and Boeing were involved, but none have issued any official statements apart from the one-pager preliminary and a couple of annual one-pager statements. In fact, the most recent annual statement due in March 2025 was missed altogether, which is against the ICAO rules. The investigators have made a few statements, but very few to reputable media. A key statement from the NTSB is the plane did what it is supposed to do by someone in the cockpit, referring to the flight data recorder and the dive and descent at the end of the flight. The NTSB also quoted, after examining the cockpit voice recorder, no Mayday call and no cockpit recording of either crew or hijacker voices. There was silence during the descent.
That sounds really perplexing, doesn't it?
It does
So,
indeed.
Yeah. So what other crash data is relevant in this case?
Yeah, there is a little bit of data. So we have the amount of fuel that was loaded, and we can estimate the weight of the aircraft and remaining fuel at the time of the crash was about 69,000 kilos. There was a seismic data record in the geoscience world, a study by some Chinese scientists, and they calculated the final vertical speed between 200 and 264 meters per second using momentum theory. Um, I determined the terminal velocity of a free falling Boeing 737 with a weight of 69,000 kilos in a nose down attitude to be between 205 meters per second and 323 meters per second. So the ADS-B data aligns with that and aligns with this geoscience world study. So this aircraft was plummeting vertically at a speed of descent of up to 30,975 feet per minute, and it only took 118 seconds for the descent. Um, and if you compare that, for example, with the German wings 4U9535 flight, which was also a shown to be a suicide pilot, which is the suspicion in this case, um, and that was in German wings under autopilot setting, and it descended at just 3,400 feet per minute. In this case, the autopilot setting was switched off and it went up to 30,000, over 30,000 feet per minute.
Yeah. It sounds very much like Silk Air, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does.
Yeah. So what was the conclusion of the investigation?
Well, we're still waiting for it. There isn't an official conclusion. Um, but when you take the key statements made by the NTSB, the plane did what it was supposed to do by someone in the cockpit, and their other statement, there was silence during the descent, and you add to that the ADS-B data with a curving non-autopilot flight path, which we showed on the screen earlier. And you add to that the descent rate, which we're showing now on the screen, which was a uh, descent in 118 seconds. But there was a very interesting point in the middle of the descent. For a short time, the aircraft leveled out and climbed even 575 feet. So we have no official conclusion, but my conclusion is that there was a silent struggle in the cockpit.
Was there any disagreement between the investigators on this?
No, there seems to be an agreement to be silent.
Yeah.
The NTSB completed their analysis almost 3 years ago, and they have only confirmed that they had received the black boxes on the 1st of April 2022 and 5th of April 2022. And in the worst case, where both black boxes are severely damaged, for example, in the TWA 800 accident, it took 8 weeks to fully recover and validate the data. So I think we can reasonably assume the analysis was completed by, say, July of 2022. But no publication of any findings, and they defer in the NTSB to the Chinese, who have made no publication either. So we're just left with the media reports and the one-page repetitious statements. But there are conflicts between the NTSB statements in the media and this report of the preliminary findings, which we're showing also on the screen. So it's not a very good situation, frankly.
So just to sort of clarify it all, what official reports have been published on this?
So the one-page preliminary report, 30 days after the crash, which is standard ICAO. However, when you look at other official reports 30 days after a crash, they're not one pages long. They're much longer. And then there's supposed to be interim reports every year until a final report is made. So there's no final report, and we've had these one-pager interim annual reports, but when you compare that with other investigations, the one-page reports from China are quite frankly quite a sick joke. Even
Yeah.
MH370, the final report was 447 pages long. And if you include the appendices, 1,483 pages long. Unfortunately, it was inconclusive. Or when you look at the Bayer reports from France on Air France 447, 373 pages, or German Wings, 110 pages, which were conclusive, then it beggars belief that the Chinese can only manage one page.
Yeah, look, it's extraordinary, and certainly the cone of silence appears to be alive and well. It goes back to our theory, well, not our theory, our observation earlier that countries don't want to own suicides, airlines don't want to own suicides, and they try and do everything they can to shift the blame somewhere else or just simply produce a report which is nonsense.
Yep. Yeah,
And
it
again,
not a very good situation.
and reinforces ICAO's role here as the International Civil Aviation Organization, the governing body of aviation, ought to have a role. Absolutely, I agree. And they must have a role. And this is the lessons we're learning, and the relevance to MH370 as well.
Indeed, it is. So my conclusion was a murder suicide by the first officer following a cockpit struggle with the captain and possibly the third officer. But that is speculation until we get a final report. There is an unconfirmed report that the first officer left a suicide note. He was, as is usual for flight crew on rotation, staying in a local Mercure hotel at the airport. And in his hotel room, a suicide note was apparently found. But that, of course, has never been published. So that's again pure speculation. So I completely agree with you, Jeffrey. The ICAO must intervene when an investigation has conflicting conclusions or official investigators disagree, or, as in this case, a final report is overdue.
Yeah, absolutely. It's an absolute disgrace. Richard, that was great work, particularly on the background to this captain who became a first officer. Certainly, on the face of it, without knowing more detail, it would seem that he had a lot of motive and obviously had been in disgrace for some reason, which we're not privy to either. So, certainly, certainly, there's motive there for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So, thank you again, Richard, for your work on this terrible tragedy. Viewers, tomorrow we're going to revert back to the three of us with Blaine Gibson answering your questions on this crash. The the ones we haven't answered on the debris, and some of the ones we still haven't answered on MH370. We're trying to get through them all, but there'll be three of us tomorrow to entertain you or to answer your questions. So please subscribe to us, please like us, and please keep those comments coming. And Richard, thank you very much indeed for your time.
You're welcome.